Well, welcome to the Collector Car Podcast. Today's going to be a lot of fun. As you know, a lot of times I do these interviews based on stuff I find interesting or questions I have. And this is a great example here. So I'd like to welcome Stephen Posner with Putnam Leasing. Stephen, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. I appreciate you being on the podcast. So this episode
Sure.
is all about like leasing a collector car. And I've seen your ads, and I just happen to have one right here. I'm a big fan of sports car market, and you're right there on the back of the Monterey Special. And
Yes.
I've seen your ads for years. I personally have not been in the market to lease a car. At least I've never thought about it. So really excited to have you on. If you would tell us a little about you and your passion for cars, as well as the business overall, kind of like a 101.
So I've been in the automobile leasing business for the past 45 years. I started as a driver in my first year of college and blew off college and stayed in the leasing business, stayed in the car business. This was back in the late 70s when you went to lease a car, and the only leasing company you could go to was an independent, like a Putnam Leasing. There was no Ferrari Financial, there was no Mercedes-Benz Financial, there's no BMW or Porsche. They were all independent leasing companies, and no two dealers did business with the same company. You did business with, if you were a dealer, the individual or the company that serviced you the best, that was competitive, that brought your business and stuff like that. And I've started out as a driver and worked my way up to sales and management, and then eventually opening up a leasing company, which was sold, and then got aligned with Putnam, which is in business since 1983, back in 1989. And I'm the CEO and have been the CEO ever since then. We have offices, our main office is in Greenwich. We have satellite offices throughout the United States, in all the major NFL cities, if you will. We presently have about 2,500 leases actively, which equates to about $500 million worth of exotic and classic cars throughout the United States.
All right, so let's go back a second. What do you mean by you were a driver? So what were you driving?
I was a gopher.
Gopher. Okay.
The correct terminology was I was a transporter, but in essence, I was go for a cup of coffee, go to the motor vehicle bureau, go pick up this car, go to drop off these contracts. I call it a gopher, but I started as a driver and worked my way up.
Your career story is really cool. You basically started at the entry-level position and now you're CEO, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
The only other position I could have started at that was lower than what I did is if I was the porter, which of course I wasn't. But I was a driver. That's all.
That's great. I love those career stories. I started as a cracker stacker, slinging cases part-time way back when. And on my day job, I made my way up to district manager and different things. So I love hearing the stories about folks that started at an entry level, then got great success, but it seems like you you're a great example of that.
Thank you.
That's really cool. Well, so give us an overview, like what kind of cars, like if I wanted to lease a car from you, what is the very first conversation we would have?
If you were not familiar on what we did, I would basically tell you, I would explain the differences between open and closed-end leasing. A closed-end lease, you would find if you went to a new car dealer and wanted to lease a Mercedes or BMW or a Porsche or a Ferrari or Lamborghini. And those manufacturers basically have an alliance with a company that leases, or a bank that specializes in that particular brand, hence Mercedes-Benz Credit and stuff like that. Those are closed-end leases, which means that you lease the car for a designated period of time, And at the end of the lease, most everybody returns the car to the leasing company and goes and leases another car. And you do have the opportunity to buy it, but generally the value that's assessed on the car is much more than what the actual value is. So people just move on and lease another car. And the only thing that you're responsible for at that point with a closed-end lease is excess wear and tear, excess mileage, and probably a disposition fee. An open-end lease is really geared more towards an individual who wants to inure the benefits, all the benefits of a lease, whether it's writing it off on your taxes or saving sales tax, paying it up front. A lot of states in the United States allow you to expense a sales tax monthly. So an open-end lease is geared more towards the individual who wants to buy the car or is going to buy the car and wants an alternate way to pay for it. If you bought $100,000 car and you got 100% financing for 5 years, I'm going to give you hypothetical numbers. Your payment could be $5,000 a month.
Right.
If you lease the same $100,000 car and we leased $100,000 of the car, your payment could be $2,500 or $3,000 a month, because at the end of the lease, there's a balloon that's due that you're responsible for. So the lease gives you the flexibility of paying less every month and being able to buy more automobile. Some of the other benefits behind our particular lease is that we go to our lenders and borrow the money to lease you the car, so it doesn't show up on your personal credit. Of course, you're not borrowing the money directly from the bank to lease the car. We're in essence borrowing the money from the bank to lease you the car. So where that would come into play would be if you're in a real estate business, or you don't want to show that you're overly leveraged when the banks run your credit. They will see or not see that you have $100,000 lease, or whatever the price of the car is. It just won't show. The only thing that would show would be an inquiry from us, which generally pops off in about 6 months.
That would still show like the monthly payment aspect of it, though, correct? Oh, it wouldn't
show anything. It just shows that someone looked at your credit.
I gotcha.
Generally, it comes off in 6 months.
And when you mentioned the balloon payment at the end, that would typically be a lump sum kind of payment to pay off the remainder of the loan if you wanted to buy the car?
Correct. You could write a check for it. You could refinance or release the balloon with us, or you could sell the car, and the difference between what's owed to us and what the value of the car is your equity in it.
Right. Okay. All right. So now I'm assuming the rates are competitive with other leasing type agents. How does that rank as far as
right now? I'd like to say we're probably more competitive than most of the manufacturers out there in our arena of what we do. There is no interest per se on a lease. There's an implied rate, and our implied rate is more competitive with a lot of the manufacturers out there today.
Oh, I gotcha. Now, what's the reason for that? Is it just your competitive edge you're working on? Is there some other driving force for that?
So we're the oldest and the largest independent lessor probably in the United States. We do business with 11 banks, which we've had relationships with for years. A company like Mercedes-Benz Credit or Lamborghini Financial only has one bank. So we have banks that compete in our arena of the kind of good customers that we have, and they're really competitive.
Right. Okay. Now, what is there a particular kind of car? Like, are we talking, 80% of your business would be modern day exotics? Do you do classic cars, 50s cars? Is there some cars you don't deal with?
We lease everything.
Okay.
We don't do kit cars. We don't like to do race cars if they're going to be raced, because generally there's no insurance on a race car if it's on a track. But we do everything. I would say predominantly, 50% of our business is probably new cars. Probably 45% new cars. Probably 15% are classics, and the rest are pre-owned.
Okay, I'm going to ask some really basic questions here. So, say I wanted to lease a 1967 big block Corvette. Who has that car? Like, do I find the car? Do you find the car? Do you have inventory? Do you search it out? Like,
we're not a dealer.
yep.
You to walk into my office, there's 30 cubicles or 30 offices. We're like a finance company, although we don't finance, we lease. Generally, the meat and potatoes of our business, besides repeat business, is we solicit dealers throughout the United States for their customers. Someone walks into a dealer that does business with Putnam Leasing and wants to lease a car that's on the showroom floor. The salesperson or management will generally put them in our direction. We'll quote the deal, and if the customer agrees, we'll make arrangements to do the leases with that customer, pay the dealership, make sure the car is insured properly, so on and so forth. So we're generally not an outlet for you to come to. If you say, I want to find a 67 big block Corvette, but if you're a present customer of ours, and call your sales rep or would call me and say, where do you think I should go to find this particular car? Obviously, we know where to go. Another very nice part of our business and profitable part of our business is we're the leasing company for the Gooding auction. It runs 3 auctions throughout the United States. And we're on premises there to all of their auctions. I know Pebble Beach is coming up. We'll be there. If you were to go to Gooding or any other auction company and want to lease the car, you can call us, because we don't have to be affiliated with the auction company to do that. And it's pretty simplistic. It's nice to know if you're pre-approved and you go to an auction that you can put your hand up knowing that you're pre-approved for $250,000 with Putnam. And generally, depending on the auction company, when we say that the person's good, they'll release the car, and then we'll go get the lease signed and fund the deal.
Okay. No, that's really cool. So is there like a list of, classic car or exotic car dealers you deal with? Or is that just we get in contact with you guys, you have your team of folks there that would just help you source exactly what you're looking for?
Generally, the dealers that give us business are the ones that give us business. If I don't quite understand your question, then if you want to repeat it.
So if I see the exact car I want, and I don't know if that dealer deals with you guys, is it
call us? You can call us.
Just call you. Okay.
Just call us, and depending on what part of the country you live in, that your call will be sourced to the salesman or saleswoman who deals in that part of the country, or perhaps deals with that dealership. We'll interface with the dealer. Naturally, after we've given you lease rates on the phone, or we'll give you a written quote, and we'll take it from there with the dealership.
I gotcha.
Get the car.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that seems pretty seamless. This is great because I never thought about leasing like this, and I've seen your advertising everywhere. So it's really thrilling to talk to you. What other aspects of this do you want to cover? Like, it looked like do you do a cap at $1 million car? Is that what it is? Like, what's the range of value that you lease?
Pretty much limitless. We've done $5, $6, $7 million cars before. We have the facilities to do it. The main thing is, I would just tell anybody that's listening, when people hear lease, they figure lease, I'm never going to own it. I'm going to give it back. I don't want to rent it. I want to own it. This is another way for you, a less expensive way for you to obtain the car that you want and eventually own it. One of the other big advantages, and I kind of touched on it at the beginning of the podcast, was sales tax. So I'm going to say hypothetically, if you live in California and you live in LA and you want to buy a car that's $100,000, you're going to pay 9.5% sales tax upfront. And when you go to sell the car or trade it into a dealer, hypothetically, there's no sales tax credit based on the purchase price of on the traded value of the vehicle. When you lease a car in the state of California, you pay your sales tax monthly. So instead of paying $9,500 in sales tax upfront on a $100,000 car, you pay 9.5% of whatever your monthly payment is.
Mm.
A lot of the cars we lease are people's toys. And we all remember when we were kids, we got tired of the toys we had. So if you acquired a car and you leased it from Putnam for 5 years, hypothetically, a lease is 2, 3, 4, and 5 years, and you kept it a year, you've essentially paid sales tax on 12 payments as opposed to $9,500 up front. Now think about it, if it's $1 million car,
Right.
$95,000 in sales tax. So, and they're not only why people in the state of California don't lease all of their cars is really beyond me, and not necessarily through Putnam, but it just makes a lot more sense sales tax wise. California is not the only state that is advantageous to lease a car. Connecticut, Florida, certain states throughout the United States adhere to that. Certain states are not sales tax friendly when it comes to leasing a car. But in the major states, and sales tax is a big component of why we do a lot of business. Plus, the IRS really can't tell you what you can drive and what you can't drive, and people still write off cars. So, and the lease is the cleanest way of writing off an automobile.
Right. Okay. Now that makes a lot of sense. Now, when I think of leases, especially on new cars, there's mileage limitations, there's different things. Is there some type of limitations on an exotic or classic? I would assume there would be some.
Well, our lease is a lease to own. So in our contract, there is a mileage limitation, but once you've purchased the car, you've traded it in, there's no mileage charge. And the reason there is a mileage limitation is in the event that we lease you, hypothetically, a new Mercedes-Benz, and we lease it for 4 years, and we ended up at some point in the lease, you default, and we get back a car with 100,000 miles. Obviously, a car with 100,000 miles is worth a lot less than a car with 25,000 miles. We have something more in writing to prove that we're damaged in court and the value of the car has diminished with there being a mileage clause. But there, with every lease, there's a letter that says when the lease is over, or if you choose to terminate the lease early, all mileage charges are null and void.
So is that different, say, for an exotic versus like 1950s Mercedes, or is the mileage constraints, I don't say constraints, but the mileage limitations about the same on a newer exotic versus an older classic?
No, they're probably about the same because, an older exotic, people really are not going to drive every day.
Yeah, right.
A 70s or 60s Mercedes or a Ferrari, it's more of a weekend car. A newer exotic, people tend to drive a little bit more. So we would probably increase the amount of mileage that we allow you in the contract. But again, it doesn't really make a difference because when you pay off the car, again, at some point during the lease or at the end, there's no mileage charge.
Right. Okay. Well, you've answered all my questions I can think of offhand. Is there anything we haven't covered that you wanted to touch on?
Give us a shot. If you out there and you want to buy a car and you want to figure out a creative way to finance your toy, we're in the toy finance business. Give us a call or send us an email. It's putnamleasing.com, and we're happy to quote it for you. And we try to make things really easy because there's nothing that we lease that anybody really needs. So we try to make it easy so it's easier for you.
Right. Okay. That's great. And I'll have all the links and the phone number in the description of this podcast. But before you go, I do want to ask you a couple car questions here. So where does your passion from cars come from? What do you like? I see you got a Martini Racing shirt on right now. Tell us a little bit about your history.
Well, at a very early age, I got to drive some really cool older cars. Being a driver in the 70s, I got to drive, 60s and 70s exotics, Ferraris, Mercedes, and stuff like that.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's kind of my passion. I'm an older car guy. I like the older Mercedes, the older Porsches. I've owned a bunch of them in my lifetime. I like those cars. I do. And the new cars are beautiful, but the old ones really still do it for me.
I noticed on your website, I don't know what year it is, probably 67, 68, 911, silver, is that put on there per your request, or is that just happenstance?
I approve all the pictures. If you look at, I would say if there are 6 ads, 5 of them are cars that I picked out. I think there's one newer Lamborghini, which we don't run that often, but predominantly they're all older cars that I picked out that I think I would like to lease if I was out there.
Yeah, I see a nice little 289 AC Cobra, one of my favorite cars. Do you have anything cool that you're currently driving?
I'm driving. It's interesting you say that. I have a bunch of cars, but I was just on the SEM rally and I turned a 1970 Alfa Romeo 1300 into a police car.
Neat.
So that was really cool. We just finished that event a couple of weeks ago and I had a really good time. A car that I've had the longest is, and you're probably going to laugh, I'm a really big enthusiast of Mercedes-Benz station wagons, the diesels. So I probably have the most expensive over the past 17 years that I've owned it, 300 TD wagon in existence. And I say that only because when you own them long enough, things go and stuff like that. And just a really great car that I don't drive too much, but that's kind of my pride and joy. I've got an old BMW now. I've got a 911. My everyday driver is a new Rover, only because I want to get back and forth to work and don't have to worry about it breaking down. But that's pretty much the gamut.
Now, what year is that Mercedes diesel? Is like 83? Is 85,
it last
85?
year?
I was going to guess 85 first, and I moved to 83. Okay. Well, that's awesome, man. So I will be in Monterey, so I'll be sure to track you down and say hello in person.
Yeah, I'm at the Gooding auction. We have hospitality area and also a booth when you walk in, but hospitality area right adjacent to the podium where the auction is. So come say hi.
I will. And as I said before, thank you for joining the Collect a Car podcast today.
Thank you for having me.